So I knew he was right about living for Christ, so I stop all of the weed stuff. Um, he stops doing like dark tattoos, like I don't know. Somebody wanted the sign of Lucifer on them or something, and he's like, absolutely not. um, and he was like, I I want to live for the Lord, because we both went to an encounter at the church and it changed our lives. And he had been raised Catholic, but he didn't practice. And this is the church. This is my home church. So I finally, get inner healing and my testimony back about Jesus, and he surrenders and gives his life to the Lord. And so now we're making friends in the church and doing things with them, and he's like, we need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. I knew he's right. So in the house, though, I remember having Thanksgiving and Christmas there, and those were probably two of the best days that I've ever had. It was full of family and friends and love and laughter and no worries. It was wonderful. Right before, we moved into the new house, he said, he wants to marry me, and I told him he had to ask my dad. So he did. While I was at work, and it threw my dad for a loop. He didn't know really what to say. I think it came out something like, yeah, if that's what she wants. I want her to be happy. If that's what she wants. So Roberto was so nervous. He was texting me before, and then and for an hour he didn't text me. I was at work, and I'm like, what did he say? And so he finally texted me back, and he's like, it's all good. So yeah, anyways, and then so everything is going well. My daughter had just got her first boyfriend, her first, serious boyfriend. She was 15, I believe. And they were together for maybe like 6 months, and he broke her heart. So she's like me. She really took it hard, and my son, he had his own room in this house, and he's never had that before. He's never had his own room. And so he was just wonderful. Him and Roberto were wonderful together, and so was him and Raya. Raya had him just wrapped around her little finger, and I loved to see how he loved my kids. He was always doing things for them. We would be out in a store, and he'd be like, oh my gosh, Isaiah would really like this, and he would just have to get it for him. And when it came to anything else, he was so cheap. He was frugal, okay? but that was good for me because I'm not good with money. But that was the wonderful time. Valentine's Day 2021. He just spoils me rotten. And I've never had that happen. Every Valentine's Day I've ever had has been just really crappy. And I appreciated him so much. Everything was coming together. We were doing Bible studies in the evening with the kids. They were participating. Things were so good. And then I wasn't getting pregnant. And that was something he really wanted. He had a hard time in that area because of the methadone. So he decides, I'm going to stop taking the methadone. I'm going to get on this shot of some kind. And it works like methadone, but it's different, and it should help in that area, right? And I'm like, okay, I mean, if you think you should do this, I really didn't want you on the methadone to begin with, but, this is the best you've been. He was on such a high dose. And he's a very, very impatient person. And when he wants to argue, he will argue. So he never did with me really much, unless he was using, anyways. He started tapering down off of the methadone, and he kept calling and asking to be tapered down more quickly. And there was some pushback, I think, a little bit from the prescribing doctor or whoever, and he would just argue and fight with them until they did what he wanted them to do. He kept wanting to just get off of it, and he kept trying to taper too soon, and it was just rapidly. Couple weeks go by, and he's finally at the point where he only has a little bit of methadone, and then he's tapered off. But he didn't sleep all night because he was having muscle spasms in his legs from tapering too quickly. And I'm just trying to help. I'm like, do you want some Tylenol? Do you want some of my leg medicine, because I have restless legs? And I was like, how can I help you? And he was like, you have to find me something with hydrocodone in it or something. And I couldn't do that, And he had a really rough day. and I I went to go pick up my kids, and he was in the passenger seat, and he told me like he doesn't want to live anymore, and he was crying, and it was pretty serious. And as somebody who has lived with suicidal ideation all her life, like I understand completely, you know. So I was very sympathetic, and I was just trying to talk to him like, no, you can't be like this. You're doing so great. We're getting better. Our family is, you know, and just trying to be positive. And he was really struggling and trying to tell me that day, and I was just trying to keep him positive. We go over to my sister's house, and my niece is having psychological stuff, and she also deals with schizoaffective episodes. So he wanted to talk to her and be like, you need to be on your medicine. It does help, even though it feels like it's not at first. He was just trying to console her. And then she tells us some pretty rough news about her past. And so it was something like I knew needed to be addressed immediately. And so I went downstairs and I had a conversation with my sister, and I told her. And since then it's been addressed. But prior to that, my niece had went, I think, a year or two with not telling this to anyone. And so after we leave, and he even was speaking to her about her suicidal ideation, and he said, you know, I get really depressed where I feel like I don't want to live, but the truth is I'm really scared to die, and I don't want to think like that, and I do want to live, you know. I just have these moments, and he was telling her this, and to help her. And so we go home, and I'm so tired because, you know, he didn't sleep because he was having spasms with his legs and stuff. But that also meant, like, I didn't sleep much, you know. Like, I tried, but I couldn't. And so I tell him, like, hey, I want to lay down, take a nap. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna walk down a couple blocks and get my hair cut. And I'm like, oh, are you okay? I was like, take Zaya with you. And I think he did, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. But next thing I know, he comes home. He's all excited. He's like, I got you some treats. Like, we used to baby talk to each other, and it was really cute. And but he kept disappearing, and I'm like, what is going on? So he told me he was taking the dog out. And then 10 minutes later, he's taking the dog out again. And I'm like, okay, what the heck is going on? So I walk into the garage, and as I'm walking into the garage, he's saying to my daughter, we can have this secret, right? And instantly, like, I'm ready to fight like a feral bear. Like, I thought it was a sexual thing. He was coming on to my daughter. And until I turn the corner and realize it's because he's doing air duster. And I couldn't even be mad anymore. he had already fallen because his glasses were off his face, and his phone had fallen by my car, and he was all the way up near the door, the garage door, to come into the house. And so I'm like, great, I don't want this around my kids. So I tell my kids, I said, hey, I need you to go to a friend of mine from the church's house, which they had been doing because she had a daughter that was their age. I was like, I need you to go to this person's house. I need to take care of this, you know. So he had my debit card. And I asked him to give it back to me. And he wouldn't. And he said, I'll give you your debit card, but you have to take me to Dollar General. Which I knew meant he was going to get more Duster. And at this point, like, I just couldn't do anything. Like, there was a moment right before I told him to get in the car that I looked him in his eyes, and tears started to well in mine, and I could barely muster out, and I just said, how could you? After all we've been through, how could you do this again? You know? And that was the last time I seen him sober. He started to cry, and he looked me dead in the eye with nothing but love and trust and truth and pain, and said, I just couldn't do it anymore. God hardened my heart that day. Because instead of praying over him or whatever, I just told him to get in the car. And I was just trying to keep him from my kids, you know? And like, I was just checked out. I was mad. I was mad at him. Which made him get mad at me because I was upset. He was like, how do you even have the right to be mad? You cheated on me, and you know, and then he just wouldn't let that go. And he called me a whore, and so I punched him in the face while I was driving, mind you. And then I finally drove to a park and parked. And what seemed like just hours, he just sat there and yelled at me and talked down to me and degraded me and did his air duster, and he was seizing, and he called his mom, and she got on the phone, and he's crying and calling me a whore again, and she's asking what's going on. I take the phone from him, and I say, he's using air duster again. And she's like, oh my goodness, you know, because she knows how he is. And he just keeps, you know, calling me a cheating whore and stuff like that. And she said to him, I told you not to be with her. I told you not to be with her. And she kept reiterating that. She's like, you can't do it. You can't be with somebody like that. And he just started crying. He dropped his phone under his seat. And at some point it died. It didn't have a charge. I was clueless of what to do, so I called my sister, and she's like, you need to take him to the hospital. Well, I had tried that another time before, and they refused to take him because it wasn't him that was wanting treatment, So I took him to the place that he had graduated his 30 days from, and was calling the buzzer because it's a locked facility and nobody was coming to help me. So I called my brother-in-law, and he came and he helped me. He called an ambulance. An ambulance came, and Roberto was seizing, so they were getting the stretcher out. As they got the stretcher out and got ready to pick him up, he came to and started screaming, I'm not going with you. I'm not leaving her. That's my wife. And then he said, if I leave, she's going to go suck someone. He was being just irate and ridiculous. And the EMT said to him, you can come with us now, or you can come in handcuffs. And so Roberto just took off. He fled. And I looked at the EMT like, go get him, And he looked at me and said, that's not my job. And he was right, but I had no one else to help me. And that was the last time I seen him alive. I went back to our house thinking at some point he'll come home. I slept on the couch with the big door wide open. The screen door, was shut, but the door was wide open. And I slept on the couch, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to sleep. I was going to be tossing and turning, but I was so tired from the night before and exhausted from the day. I slept so deeply. I didn't wake up until a friend of mine came over, and me and her used to always have coffee and sometimes go to breakfast, and she had stayed with us shortly before she got her own place, and she loved us. And she's like, well, I gotta go to Walmart. Do you want to go with me? And I knew I shouldn't, but I went. And then as soon as I walked in, I started to have a panic attack. And I was like, I gotta go home. You gotta take me home. And she took me home. And, I didn't know how to get a hold of him because his phone was dead in my car. And So he didn't have his phone. I didn't know where he went. The coroner showed up at my house around 1 in the afternoon. And I already kind of knew before he said it. I knew there were cops coming up to my house, and that was somewhat usual at this point with somebody who relapses, you know. And but I seen his thing said coroner, and you know, like, I knew. But and he was asking me a question. He said, "Are you Robin?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Does Roberto live here?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We found him this morning." When's the last time you seen him? And I told him, you know, it was about 6 p.m., 5 or 6 p.m. the night prior. That's when he took off after I had called the EMT or the ambulance, or Jimmy called him. Anyways, getting flustered. He said, well, he has you marked down as his emergency contact at the doctor's office, at the psychiatrist's office, at the hospital, because I've been going through this with him for a while, you know, and all of his family is in Champaign, and I'm the only person he trusted in Springfield. So they came and told me, and I said, do you know how? And he said, yeah, I think so. The autopsy isn't finished, but we found him, and there were a bunch of cans of air duster around him, and he was having a heart attack. He was alone. Mad at me. At some point, I went into shock because he said, do you have anyone you can call? And I was just like flipping through my phone. I couldn't even read what was on the screen. So the cop took my phone and asked me who. I didn't have an answer. Who to call? I didn't have an answer. I said his mom. As soon as she answered, I just blurted out, he's gone. And she's like, what? What do you mean? And I tried to say it again. And the coroner took the phone and said, ma'am, are you, and I heard her just screaming. And then the coroner said to me, I don't want to leave you here alone by yourself. Is there someone you can call? And I just remembered, my kids were at my friend's house, so I had him call her. And I don't remember after that for months. There were so many days I couldn't get out of bed. The only person I wanted to speak to was Daniel, which was his best friend from Springfield. The one that I met on my Roberto's first date. He had lived with us for a short while and then he went to Florida. He's the only one that loved Roberto like I did. He's the only one I wanted to talk to. And then it was about a week or two went by. And he called. He called. As soon as he called, it was like I could breathe. A little bit. He said, what happened? I told him. And he said, I'm on my way. What do you mean? Where are you? He's like, I'm in Florida. But I'm coming. I'm coming for you and the kids. He drove 2 days straight with his younger brother to me, and by this point I was drinking heavily every day. And he was taking care of my house, taking care of my children, doing my yard work, like who does that? He would just hold me and cry with me. And remind me, how much Roberto loved me. Because of how it ended, I just have so much hurt. A lot of people reached out to me during that time. A lot of Roberto's friends. And I'm sorry if I didn't get back to somebody. Like I said, I don't remember much those months. But Daniel stayed. He stayed by my side. He was there for my kids. I had spoke with a friend of mine's dad on the phone, like, the day before Daniel called. And she said, my dad, he has psychic abilities, and I think you should talk to him. So she called him and was speaking to him. She's like, I'm here for my friend right now. She just lost her husband. And he was like, oh, that's terrible. And somehow he had asked me to read the poem that I had written a few days before he passed, that I read at his memorial service. And he was like, wow, he was like, there are certain golden words, and you touched on all three of them, or something to that effect, I'm paraphrasing. And then he asked me, he said, do you know the theory of relativity? I was like, no. He's like, well, think it through. And I was like, theory, an idea, or, thought, whatever, of something that's related to something else. And he's like, exactly. He said, basically, what that theory is if you can take something like a symbol and help someone else understand it differently than you do, but still understand the same concept or symbol, right? That is the theory of relativity. He said, as long as you know that, you're going to be fine. He told me he knew my sister's name was Lindsay. I've never met him, never spoke to him. She had never spoke to him about me before. He said to me, who is Lindsay to you? And I said, that's my sister. And he said, they didn't have a very good relationship, did they? And I was like, no. Not really. And he said, he says to tell her he's sorry. There were some other things he said. We talked for a while, and I asked him, I said, will Roberto send me someone someday? He said, yeah. And you're not going to be ready. But he's going to be so much like Roberto and remind you so much of Roberto that you're going to know it was him that sent him. So, after Daniel had been there for a while, I knew it was him. I had already loved Daniel, and that pain would have kept me from letting anybody else in, letting anybody else close to my kids. They had already lost so much, you know? So, God sent Daniel. The day that I found out where he took his last breath, I went and I just prayed over that site. Just prayed over it, told him I forgive him and I'm sorry and I love him, and to go get his wings or, you know, give Jesus a really cool tattoo. It's been just a little over 3 years now. But I lost myself. I quit working, you know, and I wasn't able to afford our home, so we got evicted. And this was the day after the eviction moratorium or whatever was passed that wouldn't allow people to be evicted during COVID. But we got evicted, and so the sheriff showed up and told me and my kids and Daniel and his brother that we had 20 minutes to gather our things and leave. 20 minutes. For the most part, me and everyone else just grabbed clothes, you know, and whatever was super important. I lost everything else. We lost everything else. This is the second time that my kids have lost all of their things. So, I called their dad, which hadn't been in their lives for a long time because he was an addict for so long. And I knew he had just gotten clean. He was 3 months clean, and he was back together with his wife, the one that, you know, I got along with. And I called him and said, hey, I need you to take the kids temporarily. And he was ecstatic, you know, he was so excited. But my kids were so upset. And I remember the day that I dropped them off, the look on my son's face. He begged me not to leave him. And I did. I did. Because I was so broken. I asked my dad if we could stay in the apartment attached to the bar. He said no, someone's renting it. I asked him about another rental house. He said, well, it's all gutted right now. Nobody wants to live in that. I asked him, can we stay in the camper that you own? And he told me no. And I had nothing. I had no choice. And so we went and got in the camper anyways. Me, Daniel and his brother, and the town that we were in, I had a few friends, and they were addicts, and I had been friends with them for 20 years probably. Feels like, and they weren't when we first became friends, but at this point in time, and I didn't know really what I was getting myself into, but I asked my friend to if she could get some drugs, and I became addicted to methamphetamine for a little over a year. I'm the one that got Daniel and his brother on it. I drug them down with me. But Daniel wasn't going to leave me because I had nothing, nowhere to go. And by this time, he was starting to fall in love with me. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But I knew that mentally I didn't want to be alive, and that's all I thought about. And that my mental health was going to end me. If I didn't figure something out. And I knew, downers, I can't get any worse than where I was, so that's why I asked her for that. I used every day, multiple times a day, and it was so bad. That's where all our money went. We barely ate. I can count on one hand how many times I had a hot shower that year. It was just bad. Really bad. And it was my fault. At one point, I just cried out to the Lord. I hadn't spoken to him in a year because I was so mad at him. But I knew I didn't have a right to be mad at God and his plan, But I couldn't bring myself to talk to him. So at this point, I'm thinking, I don't know if he's even gonna hear me. I just cried out and said, Lord, I can't do this on my own. But I can't live like this anymore. And I need you. I need you. When he moves mountains, he moves them. It was about a week later, it all blew up. My mom found out, and luckily she loved me enough to take all three of us to Mount Sterling, Illinois. Well, prior to that, we had to stay in a hotel for like a week to get clean, you know, and it wasn't that hard for me, you know. Mentally it was, but physically it wasn't. And I know it's because God took that. But I had to fight all kinds of psychological stuff for like 4 months after I got sober. And the guys, they really took care of me that whole year. And Daniel still takes care of me every day. We got married January of this year. Just at the courthouse. And he's the one that was sent by God. And I know God gave me Roberto too, because I had baptized him not 6 months before he passed. And I'm lucky to have been able to love him so much before he passed, to show him that love. And so I know God gave him to me for that reason. But then he blessed me with Daniel. That man has been so faithful, so loving and caring and kind and hardworking and honest. He really is better than what I dreamed I could ever have. And it's all because I cried out for the Savior. And he rescued the three of us. I don't know if you know the statistics of getting clean from methamphetamine, but for one person, it's nil. And for 3 at one time, it's unheard of. Unheard of. So I'm gonna end here. I've had enough crying. Thanks for sticking with me.